let's have a look at the function of the dysfunction. So the function of the dysfunction. The function of the dysfunction, it's a really interesting way of thinking about how we behave. The function of the dysfunction would be things like eating disorders, addiction, drugs and alcohol, self-harming behaviors, self-shaming behaviors, any kind of acting out behavior. And I include addiction, I include anxiety in the addiction model. The function of the dysfunction is that they're all safety mechanisms. Everything that we do in our addictive acting out, whether it's anxiety or self-harming or drinking or our behavior, every single thing that we do is basically a function of the dysfunction. It's a safety mechanism that helps us to cope. So we have these extraordinary behaviors that are specifically designed to help us make sense of what is going on. So when we look at, let's say, active alcoholism, active drug addiction, active eating disorders, we're trying to cope with our feelings. So as we progress through this week, and the first day is always quite interesting because I have to make a map. I have to make a web, a gigantic web, and I have to piece by piece help you understand the web. So I know the web, but I have to go all the way back to the beginning. So the function of the dysfunction, any addictive behavior is a coping mechanism. It's a safety mechanism that helps you regulate. Now, regulate in the broad spectrum of all the different ways that we can act out. Regulation is actually dysregulation. So what we're doing is we are trying to find coping mechanisms because we can't bear how we feel. Some of us have found our coping mechanisms very, very young, very, very young. Some of us have then gone on to add new coping mechanisms. So what we could do is we could imagine that we all meet, perhaps to understand some theory, and imagine that we all meet standing in a suit of armor. We all must know what a suit of armor looks like. We've got chainmail on. Do we all understand the term suit of armor? I know not everybody's English, but suit of armor. So we've got this netting, first of all, made of iron. And then on top of that, we've got a huge breastplate. We've got shoulder plates. We've got bicep covers. We've got elbows so we can, we've got forearm covers. We've got gloves with studs on. We've got a helmet with a visor that we can bring down. We've got a back plate. We're entirely protected all the way through our body. And we've even got a codpiece. Even if we're a woman, we've got something that protects us over our genitals. So we've got an enormous amount of protection. And probably by the end of the first couple of days, you'll be able to be a little bit clearer about what you do. But if I think about maybe some of the people I work with, at the point where I might meet them, let's say in very early wanting to stop, some people may have not stopped their behavior. I can think of a client that I worked with for a long time who was bipolar. He was using crystal meth and chemsex. You'll understand the term chemsex a bit more later. He was suicidal and he was using sex workers, and he had a massive spending addiction, and he was extremely anxious. So there's something like 6 acting out behaviors, just literally bubbling along the top. He's got at least 6 or 7 different ways that he's trying to manage his reality at that point. Once we started working together, the first thing he did was go on to a contract of, we worked out what led him to the sex workers was the crystal meth. What led him to the crystal meth was the cocaine. So we worked out that the cocaine was what's called the gateway drug. Put the cocaine down, and actually then it turned out that if he would only have cocaine if he'd been drinking. So then alcohol is the gateway drug. Put the alcohol down, then he didn't take the cocaine, then he didn't take the crystal meth, then he didn't go looking for the sex workers, then he didn't spend all his money, then he didn't end up being suicidal. Am I being clear? So a whole raft of behaviors were moved away. What they were essentially was, is it like he took off his metal helmet, and then he took off his breastplate, and then he put down his sword and his mace, because they're the first layer of acting out. So then once that happened, then we had to deal with his bipolar behavior, and we had to work with his shopping addiction, and we then started to work with his anxiety. So you can see that you start to clear away the debris. And then bit by bit, as you start to clear away the debris, then you hit the stuff underneath. So if I think about just gently relating it back to myself, when I got clean and sober, it was in 1991, and I was working in Ireland. I was a makeup artist in the film industry, and I'd gone to work in Ireland. I'd put my amazing portfolio in and beat all the makeup artists in the world to work with David Bowie. And I was working with David Bowie in Ireland on a pop video. It was boom, I'd got there. But actually, I woke up, I went to bed at 3 o'clock in the morning the night before, having spent the evening in a club in Ireland, in the basement of a club in Ireland, watching a Miss Ireland competition, taking cocaine in the toilet. I'd woken up, had another line of cocaine, smoked a cigar, had a double espresso, turned up for work. David Bowie and one of his band members looked at me and said, "This is going to be fun. I think we might need to get you into 12-step recovery," which was extremely humiliating. And my first meeting was in Dublin, and I went into a meeting with him, and I put down drugs, alcohol, and gambling. And it was absolutely fucking hideous. I mean, it took me 3 months to be able to sleep. I was completely insane. I was off my head. And then what was really interesting was all the layers of stuff that were underneath that. So the recovery, the first 5 years of recovery, was kind of learning to think properly. But then from there, it's always been this thing of clearing away, kind of getting to the point where, I mean, I haven't, I drink coffee. Yeah, I drink coffee. But I mean, I don't really act out in other ways. You'll understand about how the mind works, because once you start trawling, we'll talk later on about trawling behaviors, when you start looking again for clues, things to help you act out, that's when you know you're heading back into hell. So at the point where we are right now, we're looking at the function of the dysfunction. This is essentially what happened and what you did with it.